This will sound very strange, but an extremely prophetic basketball playoff game in 1986, when at the age of 23, player number 23, Michael Jordan, scored a record number of points in a game, and the reaction of Jordan's opponent, Hall of Fame basketball player Larry Bird, famously saying that he thought Jordan was God in disguise, is a major prophecy that is revealing that the Antichrist will rise to power after the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash due to a bird strike. This video will explain how the name Larry Bird hints at this bird strike, but this video will explain so much more than this for understanding God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections that is being explained on this channel. In fact, within this video, there are about 10 different stories, 10 different videos worth of prophetic, profound information that will not be explained in any other video, in addition to this Michael Jordan, Larry Bird prophetic sign. But altogether, it is a prophecy that is predicting that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, her Air Force Two plane, caused by turbulence, lightning, and a bird strike in St. Louis as she flies across the country on November 7th, 2023. This GOAT of basketball, greatest of all time, Michael Jordan, Larry Bird prophecy, is also a prophecy that the basketball president, the GOAT Antichrist, Barack Obama, who, like Michael Jordan, is from Chicago and also wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school, will become the president again after it is predicted that his wife, Michelle, will become the president after Joe Biden will step down on November 19th, 2023. And this is hinted at with the name Michael. The name Michelle is the feminine of Michael, as in Michael Jordan. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. God uses the number 23 to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. In the Old Testament in the Bible, it is described how 2 goats were used on the Day of Atonement in the ritual on the Temple Mount. In Bible prophecy, there are 2 antichrists, and in Bible prophecy, it is said that the Antichrist will rule the Temple Mount during the end times period, and the Antichrist will be vanquished from the Temple Mount at the return of Lord Jesus Christ on the Day of Atonement in 2024. Goat is Antichrist symbolism. Goat stands for greatest of all time. And this is why the 2 goats of basketball wore jersey number 23, Michael Jordan and LeBron James. The GOAT of basketball, Michael Jordan, played for Chicago, and the GOAT Antichrist, the basketball president, is from Chicago. LeBron James is famous for being from Cleveland and having played for Cleveland and having won the NBA Finals championship for Cleveland, breaking the supposed Cleveland sports curse, which is Antichrist King symbolism, which is why LeBron James goes by the nickname King James. And this was used to point to the president Grover Cleveland, who was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, skipping the 23rd presidency, just like the Antichrist will serve non-consecutive terms, having skipped the 45th presidency. In God's true big picture of end times signs, patterns, and connections, the number 9 is the most important number, as from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment, and the number 23 is the 9th prime number, and the number 45 is the 9th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 9th row is 45. This is why Michael Jordan, in the exact middle of his career, after having won 3 NBA titles and before winning his other 3 NBA titles, retired briefly, and when he returned, wore jersey number 45 for coincidentally 23 games. And it is why Michael Jordan, in his last game as a Chicago Bull, another city God uses to point to the Antichrist, who is also from Chicago, scored 45 points against the team from the 45th state. Like Michael Jordan, LeBron James also played in Cleveland, then famously left Cleveland in much controversy, and then returned again to play a second time in Cleveland in order to win the championship for Cleveland and break the Cleveland sports curse, which symbolizes the Antichrist curse of Barack Obama when he will return to the White House for his second presidency. In other words, the hiatus in the middle of Michael Jordan's career in Chicago and the hiatus in the middle of LeBron James's career in Cleveland hint at the hiatus of Barack Obama skipping the 45th presidency and returning to the White House for a second presidency. It will be his third term, which is why Michael Jordan won 3 championships and then briefly retired before returning a second time to win 3 more championships. It is predicted that Barack Obama will become the 48th president on November 19th or November 21st, 2023, a few days after it is predicted that Michelle Obama will become the 47th president on November 13th. God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together in order to confirm the signs and connections and to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school and became president in 2009, and will become the president again in 2023. From the Bible, the numbers 9 and 23 both symbolize judgment, and the number 23 is the 9th prime number. The only grandfather-grandson presidents were the 9th and 23rd presidents, William and Benjamin Harrison. The 9th president, William Harrison, died on the calendar date April 4th, 44, which hints at the 44th president. Harrison died exactly 1 month after his inauguration. The name Harrison hints at Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash due to a bird strike and lightning and turbulence in St. Louis on October 17, 2023. And the Antichrist Barack Obama will rise to power and become president again through her replacement, which is what is hinted at with the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, President Grover Cleveland, who skipped the presidency of Benjamin Harrison. The 23rd president, which is why LeBron James, who played for Cleveland, wore jersey number 23. Michelle Obama will first replace Kamala Harris, and then Barack will replace Michelle. Michelle is the feminine version of Michael, which is the reason for the name Michael in the name Michael Jordan. In the Bible, the Hebrews crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Barack Obama's famous autobiography is named A Promised Land. Obama the Antichrist will promise the world a new world order utopia. A goat is Antichrist symbolism. The greatest of all time, the GOAT of basketball, Michael Jordan, wore jersey number 23 and jersey number 9 when he played for the U.S. Olympic Dream Team, a team that beat their opponents by an average of 44 points per game, which hints at the 44th president, GOAT Antichrist, that wore jersey number 23 and became president in 2009. If you have not already watched the Michael Jordan prophecy video on this channel, the Michael Jordan prophecy video is an essential video for foundational understanding of how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. Besides revealing the identity of the Antichrist, God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 to reveal what the mark of the Antichrist is. Bible prophecy describes a mark of the Antichrist, which if one takes, they will go to hell, and if one doesn't take it, they won't be able to buy or sell which means they won't be allowed to buy the rationed food that will be rationed due to the coming food shortages. Ezekiel chapter 9 is the chapter that describes the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist. In other words, the 9th chapter of the book of Ezekiel in the Bible is about the mark of the Antichrist, and the mark of the Antichrist involves changing one's chromosomes. And we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. God pairs 9 and 23 to identify what the mark of the Antichrist is. And speaking of the GOAT of basketball, LeBron James, who wears jersey number 23, he gave his name, LeBron James, to a Nike shoe that is named 23 chromosomes. The pattern on the shoe is unmistakably a pattern that resembles snakeskin, and that is because the mark of the Antichrist is a snake bite. The mark of the Antichrist changes chromosomes through inserting a protruding-shaped amino acid chain, and this protruding-shaped amino acid chain is synthesized snake poison. In the Bible, the biggest symbol of evil, of Satan, is the serpent. The reason why the shoe is made by Nike and why Michael Jordan is known for his Air Jordan shoe made by Nike is that Nike hints at the Nicolaitan doctrine that the vast majority of Christians have, especially evangelical Christians. This Nicolaitan doctrine of our day that Jesus said he hates in Revelation chapter 2, and that he is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. This explains why many quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist. It is judgment for their doctrine. That said, nowhere in the Bible does it say that one cannot repent after taking the mark of the Antichrist. In a prophetic game early in his career, the GOAT of basketball, player number 23, at the age of 23 years old, everything changed for Jordan. Jordan scored 63 points in a postseason game against Larry Bird and the Boston Celtics. Jordan's performance on this night is still the record for most points by a player in a playoff game. He scored 42 of the 63 points while being guarded by two future Hall of Famers. The number 42 is Antichrist symbolism, as the Antichrist is said to rule for a symbolic 42 months. 63 points hints at 6 plus 3 equals 9, and player 23 scored these points at the age of 23. This gives us a pairing of 9 and 23 that confirm the signs and connections. 63 also hints at 3 sixes, 666, the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. Larry Bird is one of the most famous players of all time. Some in the media gave him the nickname the Great White Hope, which contains symbolism alluding to Christ. In Bible prophecy, the Antichrist will proclaim himself to be God. At the time of this game, Larry Bird said, quote, "I think he's God disguised as Michael Jordan. He is the most awesome player in the NBA. Today in Boston Gardens, on national TV, in the playoffs, he put on one of the greatest shows of all time. I couldn't believe anyone could do that against the Boston Celtics," unquote. Bird made a good point about his Celtics team. They were the most dominant team that year, and they went on to win the championship. Larry Bird's remarks became just as famous as Jordan's performance. God used Larry Bird and Michael Jordan and this game to reveal that the Antichrist, the basketball president, will rise to power through the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash due to a bird strike. The name Bird in Larry Bird hints at the bird that will bring down Harris's plane. This game was played on April 20th, 1986. The date April 20th is the 110th day of the year. As has been explained many times in other videos, God pairs the numbers 9 and 110 together to confirm the signs and connections and to hint at 9/11. This is why on this date that symbolized 110, Jordan scored 63 points, which hinted at the number 9. All right, this video is truly profound, and so is this diagram. This diagram will be actually an introduction to this video. There are about 20 profound videos worth of information within this one video. Make sure you watch the whole video until its end, including after the completion of the explanation for this diagram. All right, before we get started here, I'm just going to interject. This video was produced originally before October 17th. As will be explained, God was clearly pointing to October 17th, 2023 as the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. And the signs on this date confirmed all of the analysis. There was a prophetic sign involving Kamala Harris, for example, and her Air Force Two plane, among many other things. And I'm just going to play a 6 to 7 minute video explaining this. If you've seen this introductory information in another video, you can skip ahead 6 or 7 minutes. But also here, this date, November 19th, prior to now, was believed that God is pointing to it because it would be the date that Michelle Obama would appoint Barack Obama as her vice president. This would be after it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. Joe Biden will appoint Michelle Obama as his vice president, and then he will step down. More information has come to light since the production of this video, and it is now predicted that this date here, November 19th, God is pointing to as being the date that Joe Biden will step down and Michelle Obama will become the 47th president. All right, so I'm just going to play that clip. If you've already watched it, you can skip ahead, and I'll be right back. God pointed to October 17th, ahead of October 17th. And so it was believed that Harris's predicted plane crash would be on October 17th. For an explanation for how the prophetic signs that occurred on October 17th, in fact, confirm the addition of 3 sets of 7 days to reach the predicted date that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on November 7th, 2023. Please watch the very important Gaza explosion video. If you have already watched this introductory information at the beginning of another video, you can skip ahead 7.5 minutes. The main story on October 17th was the rocket strike of a hospital in Gaza that caused the cancellation of the 4-party summit talk in the Middle East right before Joe Biden boarded his Air Force One plane for the Middle East for this talk. On this same day, Kamala Harris flew her Air Force Two plane for a talk at a university in northern Arizona near the Four Corners Monument. The 4-party summit talk between leaders of 4 nations and Harris's talk at a university in the Four Corners region pointed to the 4 horns and 4 craftsmen that are described in the apocalyptic prophecy in the 1st chapter of the book of Zechariah in the Bible. This is because in Bible prophecy, a horn is symbolic of a leader of a nation, and a college is where a trade or skill or knowledge for a profession is learned. Northern Arizona University has 7 academic colleges, and Kamala Harris is the 49th vice president. This hints at 7 and 7 times 7, because 49 equals 7 times 7. This is a symbolic 3 sets of 7. This parallels the book of Joshua and the description of the Israelites' march around the walls of security of the ancient city of Jericho once per day for 7 days, followed on the 7th day with marching 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets, after which the walls of security then collapsed in God's judgment. In the book of Joshua, it was in fact a 7 days followed by a 7 and 7. It was a symbolic 3 sets of 7. This is why 3 sets of 7 days from the 49th Vice President's flight to visit the university with 7 academic colleges on October 17th will be the date it is predicted that the 49th vice president will die in a plane crash. More precisely, the Israelites marched once per day for 7 days, and then on the 7th day they enacted a symbolic 7 and 7, with their marching 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. Likewise, 7 days after the 49th vice president flew on her plane to visit 7 academic colleges was October 24th, and the day that 2 planes collided with each other, clipping their wings, at the airport 7 miles from downtown Houston in Harris County in Texas, which was the same day that the agency in Gaza confirmed that there had been 700 deaths from Israel's air raid in the prior 24 hours, the deadliest 24-hour period in Gaza thus far in the conflict. This followed Israel's deadliest day when Hamas invaded and killed 700 plus 700 Israelis. This hinted at adding 7 plus 7 days after 700 Gazans were killed to reach the date that it is predicted that Kamala Harris, the 49th vice president, which hints at 7 times 7, will die in a plane crash, and the report of the death of 700 Gazans was 7 days after the 4-party summit regarding Gaza was cancelled due to the explosion at the hospital in Gaza on the same day that Kamala Harris visited the Four Corners region and the university with 7 academic colleges. The first chapter of Zechariah also mentions 4 horsemen among myrtle trees. The number 37 hints at 3 sets of 7, and this is why the rocket struck the hospital in Gaza exactly 37 weeks after the Chinese spy balloon crossed over the northern border wall of security with Canada and into the US, which is the 49th latitudinal line. The 49th parallel hints at 7 times 7, before being struck down by a rocket off the shore of Myrtle Beach, North Carolina. The Zechariah prophecy that mentions myrtle trees also mentions God's mercy and promise to restore Israel after its 70 years of captivity in Babylon. The Chinese spy balloon was struck down by a rocket next to Myrtle Beach exactly 70% of a year, which hints at 70 years before the rocket struck the hospital in Gaza, which canceled the 4-party summit, which alluded to the prophecy of 4 horns, 4 horsemen, and myrtle trees. This 70% of a year in between these 2 rocket strikes is predicted to be followed by 3 sets of 7 days before it is predicted that the 49th vice president's plane will be struck by God with lightning, turbulence, and a bird strike, and then predicted to crash near the I-70 highway in St. Louis, a city over which passed the 70-mile-wide path of totality of the Great American Eclipse, when it also passed over 7 cities named Salem, which hints at Jerusalem, almost 7 years ago. The reason for this middle date of October 17th, the reason why God pointed to October 17th in advance of October 17th, is that the date 1017 hints at the important verse in the book of Zechariah, the prophetic book that speaks of 4 horns, 4 craftsmen, and 4 horsemen among myrtle trees, which is chapter 1, verse 17. Cry out again, thus says the Lord of hosts, my cities shall again overflow with prosperity, and the Lord will again comfort Zion, and again choose Jerusalem. When the prediction for Harris's plane crash comes to pass, It will prove that Islam, Jehovah's Witness, and the theology among Catholics and Protestants that says that the church has replaced Israel are all false and wicked deception from Satan. Make no mistake, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove this. This isn't even scratching the surface of the importance of the prophetic signs that occurred on October 17th, 2023. So make sure you watch the Gaza explosion video. But here we need to demonstrate here through this diagram how God has used Michael Jordan and Larry Bird and their famous match in which Michael Jordan scored 63 points in this playoff game as was just described. Now, we'll just get into it, right? Just dive right in here because we've explained the background regarding this game. First of all, what wasn't mentioned is that the game was between Chicago and Boston, and that's also symbolic because Chicago symbolizes the Antichrist, who is from Chicago, and this is why Michael Jordan played for Chicago. Barack Obama is from Chicago, that's why. And Boston is symbolism for the spiritual founding of America. And so therefore, this is Antichrist judgment warning on America. The foundation, the nation was founded with the Pilgrims in the Massachusetts Bay Colony and in Boston, and that's why God uses the city Boston frequently in his signs, is to point to this, to point to the relationship that God has had and America has had with God throughout the years of its history. And because of that relationship, America is to be judged because of the promises of blessings and curses. That is a parallel with the Bible when the Israelites crossed over the Jordan River into the Promised Land. John Winthrop delivered his famous City on a Shining Hill speech before they disembarked the flotilla and founded the Boston, Massachusetts Bay Colony. And that speech was derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28 regarding the promises of blessings and curses. Okay, so Larry Bird was number 33. And so we have, well, let's begin with the fact that, with this connection between this game involving Michael Jordan, who, as I am saying, is symbolic of the Antichrist, who will come to power, the Antichrist will come to power through the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash that will be the result of a bird strike. And this is why the name Bird in this Michael Jordan prophetic sign. Okay, and so Larry Bird in this Michael Jordan game, and again, once again, a big part of this prophecy regarding this game is Larry Bird's words regarding it, comparing Michael Jordan to God, very Antichrist. So this game was 21 years and 6 months exactly after the birth of Kamala Harris. And that is for the purpose of hinting at the number 216, because the Antichrist was born on the 216th day of the calendar year, and which is August 4th, and 216 is 6 times 6 times 6, which in Bible prophecy is the number of the Antichrist. And that's why we have this exact 21 years and 6 months, which hints at 666, from the birth of Harris to this Bird Michael Jordan game, which is ultimately pointing to the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash due to a bird strike, as we have it labeled over here at the other end of the diagram. So we have, what I'm saying is a straightforward trail of prophetic signs leading to the predicted date that she will die in a plane crash. And it is focused, in this particular case, on this prophetic game involving Larry Bird, because her plane will crash due to a bird strike. And so when we add exactly 33 years, we get this date here, which is the anniversary of the Columbine shooting. And there's many prophetic signs which will be explained later in this video that occurred on this date. I'm not going to get into this date right here in this diagram because it's explained later in the video. But in the Bible, a 20-year period is symbolic of a complete and perfect period of waiting. Okay, and so that's why God frequently uses 20 years connections. God is waiting for America to repent and giving it an opportunity to repent. And this is just, for example, why the U.S. military presence in Afghanistan collapsed suddenly, dramatically, exactly 20 years after the Twin Towers collapsed on 9/11. And of course, the Afghanistan war was a result of 9/11. Anyway, this gets us to this Columbine shooting. This is the anniversary of it, but this is the Columbine shooting in which a man, or rather a teenager, a boy, named Eric Harris and his partner, Dylan Klebold, shot many people in the Columbine High School in Colorado. Now, there are some details that I'm forgetting here, including the time at which the shooting started. And if I'm not mistaken, it started at 11:09 or something, but it had a 9/11 symbolism in the time of the start of the shooting. I apologize, but nonetheless, it's explained somewhere else in one of the other videos, and when this prediction comes to pass, you should know that you need to watch every single minute of every video on this channel. All right, and so the reason why this connects to Kamala Harris and her birth date is that, first of all, the shooter was Harris, and the DK, Dylan Klebold, is the initials of Kamala Harris. K. Devi Harris. Okay, so that's, through this, God was pointing to this, to Kamala Harris. And confirmation of that is this astounding connection, because it is exactly 12,600 days, which hints at 1,260 days, which is a number of days mentioned 7 times in Bible prophecy as symbolizing the period of the end times and the Antichrist. But not only this 12,600 days is also exactly 600 plus 600 plus 600 weeks, which is a second witness to this. And that, of course, hints at 666, the number of the Antichrist. And by the way, this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter as the Bible says is required, and this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And so this, in other words, again, is a second witness to this 600 plus 600 plus 600 weeks is also confirmation of this extremely prophetic 12,600 days between the shooting in Columbine and by a man named Harris and the birth of Kamala Harris. All right, now another very important reason why this is an important connection and prophetic sign is that, again, the death of Kamala Harris will lead to the rise of the Antichrist, who is said in Bible prophecy to be enforcing or will enforce the mark of the Antichrist. The mark of the Antichrist is why the reason for this prophetic sign. It's not the only reason. First, actually, mass school shootings have been judgment from God for abortions. And Columbine began the trend of mass school shootings, and this trend began coincidentally, but not coincidentally, at the time of the peak of the kids of the baby boomer generation in high school, as abortions were legalized for the baby boomer generation. And so baby boomers, whether they've had an abortion or not, they condone this generation condones abortions, and it was legalized for this generation, and this is the reason for the non-coincidence of these mass shootings in schools beginning and following the peak of the baby boomer generation's kids in high school, and then later in the 2000s, the first decade of the 21st century, in university shootings were then the thing. But also the school shootings and also mass shootings in general are symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist, because they symbolize a gun with a bullet coming out of it and going into a person is symbolism for the thing that comes out of a thing and goes into people. The SHOs. And you know what I'm talking about. The thing that you can't talk about. So the thing that comes out of a thing and goes into people is symbolized through the bullets that come out of guns and go into people. And so keep that in mind. There will be a number of mass shooting signs in this diagram, including this one, which is the next step in this trail, actually, because exactly 117 weeks after, oh, and by the way, the sign on this date was a school shooting. Well, rather, it was a Columbine mass shooting sign. But again, I go into the details, but 20 schools, and it was 20, and it was on the 20th anniversary, 20 schools in the Denver area went on lockdown because of a woman that made, a young woman, a teenager, made the trip to Denver from Florida, and she was inspired by the shooters in Columbine, and she bought guns and whatever, and they knew about it because, anyway, it's a long story, and it's very interesting, so make sure you watch the rest of the video. So in other words, it's another shooting sign. And there are other signs here too on this day, which I'll explain later. Now, it's exactly 117 weeks to this mass shooting. Well, it wasn't a mass shooting actually, but it was a shooting. And it was thought maybe it was a mass shooting at the time, because gunshots were heard outside of the Washington Nationals baseball team stadium during a baseball game. It wasn't a mass shooting, but the people in the stadium were very frightened, and many took cover, for example, into the baseball players' dugout. The stadium was evacuated, etc. It was a big deal, and it was a national news story. You probably remember this. And it turned out, though, that it was I believe, a gun, or rather a drug-related thing in the parking lot of the stadium, but not anything to do with a mass shooting. However, 3 people were injured, or 3 people were shot, I should say, and that is a hint at the third presidency for the Antichrist in Washington, D.C. This game was in Washington, D.C. It was the Nationals baseball game. That's the name of the baseball team. But God uses, well, okay, so the number 117 is extremely important, and it is so important that I made an entire video about it, and so there's no point in explaining or trying to explain it here. It would take too long. And it's about a half hour, and I put a lot of effort into it, and it is a foundational must-watch video. In fact, I recommend stopping this video, watching it, and coming back. The video is titled, Harris's Crash will be on prediction on 10/17. Hints are equals. Eclipse peaked at 1:17 p.m. The eclipse that went over America in 2017 peaked at 1:17 p.m. over St. Louis. And this is one reason why it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash in St. Louis, in fact. But the number 117, long story short, is actually symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist. All right? It's also symbolism for a number of other really, truly profound things. So watch the other video. But God also combines 1s and 7s in other formats as well, including, for example, the date that she will die, 10/17, hints at 117, October 17th. So, and this date here, which is a combination of a 1 and 7s here, okay? The date, July 17th, the date of the Nationals shooting, which was 117 weeks after the Columbine shooting sign on the 20th anniversary. And also, this this Nationals Stadium shooting was 117 days after this mass shooting. You will recall the mass shooting at the King Supermarket in Boulder, Colorado. And so that's another sign that is explained in other videos. It killed 10 people, and it was on Nisan 10, the date in the Hebrew calendar in which Joshua crossed over and the Israelites crossed into the Promised Land, the date that Jesus officially arrived as the King of Kings. Hence why the King Supermarket shooting. In Boulder hints at rock. In the Bible, rock symbolizes Jesus. Okay. And so I don't want to get too much more. I just want to just confirm these things. And that's, again, how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third witnesses confirming a matter. But the really difficult or extremely difficult thing about explaining God's prophetic signs or his big picture of signs is that when you try to explain one part of it, you end up pulling the entire web, because the things in it require the second and third witnesses to confirm the matter, and those things in turn require second and third and more witnesses to confirm them, and those things in turn require second and third witnesses to confirm them. And it just goes off into infinity, just like the Bible. The Bible is not a linear document, and it can't be understood through isolating a particular passage. It needs to be understood as a whole, which is a lesson that evangelicals need to learn in general. But the same is true with God's big picture of signs. And anyway, just for example, this date here and this date, they connect. I'm not even scratching the surface of how to explain it, because these things go off into a whole other story, which is explained already in other videos too. Like, for example, this date is exactly 150. No, I'm not even going to give you the example. So anyway, it's 23 days. This shooting was 23 days after this prophetic Chicago Cubs no-hitter. And if you don't know baseball, it's a big deal when the pitcher pitches a complete game without allowing a single hit. And it's a big celebration. It's very rare. And this was a no-hitter for the Chicago Cubs on this day. They won the game 4-0, and it required 4 pitchers to complete the no-hitter. And that gives us a hint at 44. The 44th president, who is from Chicago. And there's, I could go off onto another tangent and explain Chicago and how how player number 44 for the Chicago Cubs gave as a gift to Obama at the White House jersey number 44 4 days before he left office, and on and on. And so anyway, the point is that the 44th president is from Chicago, and this 4-0 no-hitter pitched by 4 pitchers hints at 44. And how God confirms his signs and connections is through pairing certain numbers together. If you think about it, because as I mentioned, it is required for there to be second and third witnesses to confirm the matter, and that's what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination. And one simple way in which he would provide second witnesses for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 23 and 44. Because the 44th president is the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school, and will become the president again in 2023. And so this is just scratching the surface, but it is how or why 23 and 44 are paired together. And so that confirms this 23 days connection between this baseball sign and this baseball sign, which is another second witness in itself, by the way. We were talking about 2 baseball signs because this shooting was in the baseball, or rather this incident involved the baseball game at the Nationals Stadium. Okay, and it connects with the Chicago game, and we are talking about the 44th president in Washington, D.C. becoming the Antichrist. The president that installed a basketball court in the White House grounds and wore 23 when he played basketball. Okay, so that's a solid connection. It is amazing, all right? But there's more to that. Okay, but the thing is, too, God pairs 9 and 23 together. He pairs 44 and 23, and he also pairs 9 and 23. And I've already explained how God pairs 9 and 23 together at the beginning of this video. And so therefore, as we can see, this is an astounding confirmation, because we were talking about the Antichrist becoming the president again in Washington, D.C. through the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash, and her plane will be in her Air Force Two plane from Washington, D.C. on her way back to Los Angeles. And it'll be exactly 9 plus 9 plus 9 months after the Nationals shooting, with 3 people shot, hinting at the 3rd term. Now, God frequently repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. And the number 9 is the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, as from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment. And so that's astounding. We have this shooting sign, and again, shooting signs are symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. Okay, I explained that. So that's what this shooting is really all about. And it's talking, or it's pointing to the rise of the Antichrist, who will enforce the mark of the Antichrist after the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash due to a bird strike. Hence why, again, this all connects to Larry Bird and Michael Jordan. It is amazing. Well, let's go to the top of the diagram now, because speaking of the number 117, this shooting, again, shootings symbolize the mark of the Antichrist. This shooting was exactly 117 months before the inauguration of the 44th president. Okay, from the birth of Kamala Harris, it is 531 months exactly, and that's prophetic because this is the number of days in a blood moon tetrad. And we are getting to a blood moon sign here, a lunar eclipse sign after this connection. Okay, and so in a blood moon or lunar eclipse tetrad, which if you don't know, it's 4 blood moon eclipses in a row that all fall on Jewish feast dates with no intervening lunar eclipses or partial lunar eclipses in between. And then they are separated by 177 days, 3 sets of 177 days. And that again is, like I'm saying, God uses these combinations of 1s and 7s for prophetic significance, which is explained in that video that I mentioned a minute ago. All right, so from the day that we have the inauguration of the 44th president, 117 months after this extremely prophetic, symbolic first mass school shooting, we have this connection of 2 times 2 times 30 months, which hints at 223, and 223 is the 48th prime number. The 48th prime number hints at the 48th president, who will become the Antichrist. What also makes this connection relevant is this particular blood moon on January 20th, 2019. Now that's a typo. Okay, that should be 19 there. Is that it was centered completely over America. It was a lunar eclipse judgment warning sign for America. And that's why it was centered over America. As America is God's Gentile nation, there have only been 2 nations in the history of the world that were founded on a relationship with God, Israel and America. After God departed Israel, after the Jews rejected him, he went on to found his Gentile nation, America, long story short. And so America is also synonymous with the church. And God is very, very displeased with the church, specifically the American Evangelical Church of Laodicea. And you will not hear that message pretty much anywhere else. And that is the reason, or one reason, why this is the only place you will learn about God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. One of the main themes of God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections is judgment warning for the church, and specifically America and the American church, and even more specifically the American Evangelical Church. which is why we have this connection to Dallas, the home of evangelicalism, where they, for example, churn out, and I say the home of evangelicalism because this is actually the mainstream media that calls it this. But Dallas is also the home of the seminaries that churn out the nation's pastors that teach the heretical Nicolaitan doctrine that Jesus said he hates in Revelation chapter 2 and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. And rather than get into doctrine here, I'm just going to tell you, to save time, to watch the 23 church signs video on this channel, arguably the most important video on this channel, especially if you are a Christian. I really do not know what you are thinking if you skip that video. And if you intend to, you might as well turn off the video now. Because what I'm saying is the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction, make no mistake, is to identify specifically what the Nicolaitan doctrine is that Jesus hates. And he has specifically, precisely identified what it is. And it is not only the doctrine that they teach, but it is pastors themselves, actually. Pastors are the problem, period. Because the word Nicolaitan is actually derived from two Greek words that mean rulers over the laity, ruling over the laity. And we inherit this modern version or tradition of what we call pastors from Catholicism and priests and reverends, etc. And sitting in rows, listening to someone speak for an hour where no one else is allowed to talk. And if they do, they'll be quickly escorted out of the building to talk to the group if they have something to say to the group. And we have this, what we call a ritual, a superstition of this church, this thing we call church, going to church. And so, okay, two things, the egregious sins that the pastors do. One, Jesus forbid calling anyone your teacher except for him. But that's what people do. They call their pastors their teacher and they go to be taught. But the Bible is very simple to understand and anyone can understand it for themselves if they read it for themselves. Furthermore, it's better if they do because they will not be influenced by the cultural traditions that are instituted through what we call church today. This and the monopoly on doctrine that these pastors have. And this is all supported by money. The reason why the heretical doctrines have been cemented and been passed down through the generations and have progressively gotten worse in both cases, Catholicism and Protestantism, because evangelical culture and doctrine has gotten worse over time. Well, actually, I should rephrase that. Calvinism, for example, has waxed and waned 4 times over the last 500 years. People eventually figure out that it's not the Bible, and then that's forgotten, and then they get excited about Catholicism again. And currently, we are in a cyclical peak of Calvinism, which is appropriate given the timing of the end times. Okay, so I'm not going to get into doctrine. I'm just going to finish up on pastors, though, because we were talking about Dallas here in this sign. Now, so the other thing that they do is they preach for money, which Jesus absolutely strictly forbid. And they twist the passages to support that they can teach or preach for money. But when we read this correctly and not leave out the preceding passages and other related passages and read it in context, it's very clear that what is being talked about is nourishment, food, shelter, just like the disciples when they were sent out. And the reason for that, we can see the wisdom, is what I'm just talking about, this cementing and passing on, institutionalizing, and thus making it cultural, these heretical doctrines, man-made doctrines. I'll give you, so anyone that reads the Bible for themselves, who isn't influenced by the culture, for example, someone in jail, they will never, ever come to the conclusions of Reformed theology and Calvinism. One has to be taught this and taught all of the workaround solutions, the creative workaround solutions to the countless passages that flatly contradict their doctrine. Many passages they just completely ignore. But the big ones, they have these workaround solutions that are nonsense. Anyway, that's evangelicalism for you today. And the reason for the bad fruit that is produced by this bad tree is rooted in doctrine and pastors. All right? So, this is the home of Dallas. Okay, that's Dallas for you. And that's why God pointed to Dallas, the home of evangelicalism. Let me just add this, though. God, or Jesus, said that he reproves whom he loves. The evangelical church is the church of Laodicea that Jesus is knocking on the door of and isn't inside. But, as he says in that same letter, he reproves whom he loves. Okay? So, he wants to be inside. All right? But anyway, when asked by his disciples for the signs to look for of his return, Jesus replied with the metaphor of birth pains. And not only does the number 9 symbolize judgment, but in his signs, these 9 months connections are extremely prophetic. And that's why from this blood moon that was centered completely over America, it is exactly 9 months to these 9 tornadoes that touched down in Dallas at 9 p.m. and destroyed half of a church on 9th Street in Dallas. That was amazing symbolism for judgment of the church, the half of the church, right? The primary purpose of the end times, many quote-unquote Christians are not clear on this. They have this idea that, the world is very dark and the end times are coming now and the Antichrist is coming now because God needs to, one word they'll use maybe is purge the world of the evildoers, etc. Or, well, anyway, you get the idea. But that is incorrect. The primary purpose of the end times and the Antichrist is to test the faith of quote-unquote Christians. But the evangelicals will never even think of that as a possibility because their doctrine tells them that they are already saved past tense. They're not on the road to salvation. They're not on the path. They're not in the process of being saved. They're already saved. And they have also this frequently dispensationalism doctrine, which says that even these letters that Jesus wrote are not for them, because of course they couldn't be, because it's filled with doing things, which they have a phobia against evangelicals, of doing any works because of their misinterpretations of Paul's writings and interpreting the teachings of Jesus through the writings of Paul instead of the other way around. And so they have a phobia when it comes to doing works, in fact. But the letters to the churches in the book of Revelation, which is regarding the end times, are filled with the church or Jesus's admonishment of doing works. But this is why Luther wanted to remove the book of Revelation from the Bible. And other books, including Hebrews and the book of James, for that matter, because of the contradictory passages. Anyway, so a lot of Christians have this idea that the rapture is coming and then God's going to purge the world. No, my friend, that's not what's happening. What's happening is that the Antichrist is coming because God is very displeased with the church. As Peter said, judgment begins with the church, the quote-unquote Christians that aren't really living any differently, barely indistinguishable lives than other non-believers. They're interested in their careers, their families, their vacations, their retirement. And there's a very good reason why many quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist. Anyway, need to move on. So this game, or these 9 tornadoes that touched down at 9 p.m. and destroyed half the church on 9th Street 9 months after the blood moon over America. This occurred during a Sunday night nationally televised football game that was in Dallas. And the team that was playing Dallas was the Philadelphia Eagles. And the Eagles are the Church of Philadelphia is the only church that Jesus said would be raptured, evacuated, spared from the coming severe persecution from the Antichrist. And the story regarding this was the humiliating defeat that the Cowboys suffered. And the coach commented that, and this is so prophetic, he said, after the game, he said, we really need to take a hard look at ourselves in the mirror. And that is exactly Jesus' letter to the Church of Laodicea, that thinks that it is in need of nothing, which is exactly the state of evangelicalism because of their doctrine. Make sure you watch the 23 church signs video on this channel. All right, now, God pairs 9 and 44 together. The 44th president became president in 2009. Furthermore, 9 symbolizes judgment, and the 44th president is the Antichrist for that judgment. And so we have this exact 4 times 4 months. Before I move on, we have this connection up here. So we have this 120 months, which is, again, a hint at the 48th president because of the 48th prime number. And then followed by 9 months, well, we have a second witness to this, which is this exact 129 months. And in this trail, we have the blood moon. And this is because the 129th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word blood. That's right. What does the thing do? The thing that is the mark of the Antichrist, it affects one's blood, which is why this ties to this massive judgment for the church sign. Massive sign. By the way, this connects to the Dallas Cowboys later in this same season being stranded in Philadelphia, as in left behind. Their plane malfunctioned and they got left behind in Philadelphia. Philadelphia went on to the playoffs because of that game. In other words, Philadelphia was raptured, but the other church, the other evangelicals were not. They were left behind. Okay, that's another story for another day. Okay, so that's why we have this amazing 129 months. This is, in fact, the point of this. From the inauguration of the Antichrist to this massive judgment sign for the church, the American church, it is exactly 129 months because this hints at the mark of the Antichrist. And okay, I didn't say this. One reason why many quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist is that it is, in fact, judgment for their doctrine. Those that believe that, well, this couldn't be the mark of the Antichrist because the rapture hasn't happened. Well, trust me, that is the Nicolaitan doctrine that Jesus said he hates. And this is the reason why these Christians, quote-unquote, have taken the mark of the Antichrist. It's judgment for that doctrine. Okay? So, by the way, nowhere in the Bible does it say that one cannot repent after taking the mark of the Antichrist. So, in any way, the commonly held objections that people have based on their understanding of Bible prophecy, I answer in the must-watch Snakebite video. But make sure you understand clearly what I'm saying here. Make no mistake. The reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to end the debate. Case closed. No more discussion as to whether or not it is the mark of the Antichrist. It is the mark of the Antichrist. It is not a supposed precursor to the mark of the Antichrist. And it is the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. It does not need an additional something, such as an additional technology or a false form of religious worship, or a new dispensational age, such as the supposed age that comes after the supposed all Christians will be raptured. And the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove this. You feel free to disagree before the prediction comes to pass, but once it does, end of debate. It's over. It is the mark of the Antichrist. And believe me, I know far better than you why God has given me a voice through this prediction. It is to prove this. Now, this Dallas sign here was also exactly 660 months exactly after the birth of Kamala Harris. And again, this leads on to the day that she will die in a plane crash, which will lead to the rise of the Antichrist. 66, because the 66th book in the Bible is the book of Revelation, in which the Antichrist is described, and his number is 666. Okay, so, and he is the 44th president, which is why we have this 4 times 4 months connection, which is also 70 weeks, which is extremely prophetic because the most central prophecy in the Bible is the 70 weeks prophecy. And the 70th week regards the period of the end times and the Antichrist. So we have a second witness. This 70 weeks is also exactly 4 times 4 months to this prophetic plane mishap or aviation incident. This was when the engine of Flight 328 exploded over Boulder, Colorado. Again, Boulder is symbolic of a rock, and in the Bible, rock is Jesus. And this was the it was the date 220, which hints at 220, which symbolizes rock, which symbolizes Jesus. Because the 220th word in Strong's Greek Concordance is the word Peter, or rather rooster, and rooster is symbolic for Peter, and Peter's name means rock. And Flight 328, because, there's a few reasons. One is that Deuteronomy chapter 28. And the third term of the Antichrist. But Deuteronomy chapter 28, again, is that chapter that the speech of John Winthrop's was derived from, of God's promises of blessings and curses. Okay, and but also, I know this from other signs, is that 328, because actually 36 days after this, which is prophetic, is the date 328, and that was exactly 6 times 6 times 6 weeks after the 3/28 Super Bowl, and on and on. But the point is that I know this with authority. I can say this. 328 here is also hinting at Daniel 3:28, and that is because that is the verse in Daniel chapter 3 that is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist and bowing down to the Antichrist. Okay, that is the verse of that chapter, and that's why, for example, the coach in the 3/28 Super Bowl, his name was Dan, and said Daniel, and all that. So, also the flight was on its way to Hawaii, and it was from Denver, and Denver is the highest city in America, and Bama in Hebrew means high place. That's why Barack Obama had his Democrat convention acceptance speech in 2008 in the Mile High Stadium in Denver. All right, and Barack Obama is from Hawaii, which is why the flight was on its way to Hawaii. All right, and the debris scattered over Boulder, Colorado. All right, well, in the Bible, this number symbolizes the flood judgment. Methuselah died at this age at the time of the beginning of the flood judgment, 969. But God does this also, this combination here also hints at 666. Because when we flip the 9s upside down, it is 666. It took me a while to figure that out, that God was doing that, and that is the case. But it is also a very prophetic, important number in the Bible regarding judgment, in fact, anyway. And so this connection is relevant. It's a relevant connection. It is also the 17th tetrahedral number. And the number 17 symbolizes the Antichrist. The Antichrist is described as being a beast that has 7 heads and 10 horns, but also will be defeated on the Day of Atonement, the 10th day of the 7th month, for which the number 17 symbolizes. All right, now, going back here now, let's return back to the Jordan bird sign. That's the inspiration for this diagram. This date here, April 20th, 1986, is exactly 1,709 weeks to the inauguration of the Antichrist, the 44th president, who was president from 2009 until 2017. And this is why God frequently pairs 9 and 17 together in his signs to confirm the signs and connections. And this is astounding, beyond words, because it's the inauguration of the president, for that matter. And it was the presidency from 2009 until 2017. That is how important this Michael Jordan, Larry Bird prophetic sign is. The Chicago-Boston game with the points that hint at 666. 3 6s. Okay? Wow. But not only that, it is amazing. From his inauguration, in turn, it is exactly 252 weeks to the date it is predicted that Barack Obama will become the 51st vice president on November 19th, 2023. 252 weeks hints at another very prophetic period in Bible prophecy, which is 2,520 days, which in the Daniel chapter 9 prophecy is symbolic of the end times and the period of the Antichrist. And so that's why we have exactly 252 weeks from his inauguration to the date it is predicted that he will become the 51st vice president. It doesn't get any more amazing, in fact. And then we have it in turn connecting with 1,709 weeks. Wow. Okay. And, okay. So, just for, because it's not really related to this subject, but we might as well. It kind of fits into this diagram, though. I did it for interest's sake. The day that he will become the vice president hints at 9/11, which is why the date 11/19, which hints at 9/11, is 1,111 days exactly after the shoplifted referendum, which is in turn exactly 999 weeks after 9/11. And this 999 weeks and then 1,111 days hints at 9/11. That's jaw-dropping as well. Also on this day, it was reported there were 230,000 deaths, and that's a hint at 23, which pairs with the 999 weeks. 230,000 deaths from the CVD disease, supposedly. And, well, also, this was the time that, the reason for going into this is because this date here, this date 220, which hints at 220, 220 is also a 9/11 number because there were 2 towers that were 110 stories high that collapsed. And so, I forgot to write it in here, but this date is actually 110 days after the shoplifted referendum. But also, the woman that played the clock tower lady in the movie Back to the Future died on this date. Her last role as an actress was Mrs. Harrison, which hints at Kamala Harris. And there's lots to it. It's explained in another video. But she hands out the flyer for the tower for trying to raise money, right? And the tower was struck by lightning, which hints at the striking of the Twin Towers on 9/11. And she died on the date 11/2, which is 999 weeks inclusive count. And God uses straight counts and inclusive counts, which means you include the starting date equally as frequently. Okay, so they're both valid. And anyway, the date 11/2 hints at the 2 towers that struck the towers that looked like a giant 11. Sorry, the 2 planes that struck the 2 towers that looked like a giant 11. So the clock tower lady died on this day. And anyway, it's a plane crash sign, and it connects with 110 days to this plane crash sign right here too, is why I wanted to. And God pairs 110 with the number 9 to confirm the signs and connections and to point to 9/11. And that's explained many other times in other videos, so I won't explain it again here. But that's it for this diagram. If you persevered through this diagram with me, I commend you, and highly, highly recommend you watch the remainder of this video. Although it was produced a while ago, it will cover about, like I say, 20 videos worth of profound prophetic signs you won't learn about anywhere else other than this video. So I recommend watching this video, and it's very important for that matter as well. I decided to put the remainder of this video into a part 2. So look for part 2 I may leave the link to part 2 in the description box below this video. If not, if it's the case that it's not there, just look for part 2, and I think you will very much appreciate part 2 as well. If you are watching this video on the platform that has the initials of YT, this video part 2 will not be on this platform. Furthermore, you need to get over to another platform anyway, so now is a good time to do that. Go to the other platforms and find part 2. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more. Don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the BitChute.com or the Odyssey.com channel. And do it now in case you aren't able to later.